Hello everybody and welcome to today's session, Why GRC and Access Governance are the Digital Enterprise's Perfect Partners. My name's Emma and I'm here on the marketing team here at SafePaaS, and I'm delighted to be joined by industry experts Paul Cadwallader and Adil Khan. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. So the session will be recorded. All attendees are on mute, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop those in the control panel and we'll get to those at the end of the session. So, Paul, before we dive in, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Of course, Emma, thank you very much. So Paul Cadwallader, I'm head of business development at CoreStream, but I've got more than around 20 plus years of experience in the GRC space, having been a former Big Four partner here in the UK.
Great. And we are still waiting for Adil to join, so hopefully he'll join soon. So in the meantime, this is the agenda we'll be following today. Just to get on the same page, we'll be talking about, what is GRC, what is access governance, the current challenges businesses are currently facing, drivers, best practices, and benefits. So, Paul, over to you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So first of all, let's look at the definition. So I'm going to cover GRC. So GRC is much wider than, often when people hear GRC alongside access governance, they think segregation of duties or a particular software vendor because they have modules called GRC. It's actually all aspects of an organization. So if we think about governance, it's the setup and the processes to help reliably achieve objectives in an organization. And then from a risk management point of view, it's about addressing uncertainty. We actually look at ISO 31000, it defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So good risk management is about achieving those objectives, optimizing those risk-taking elements, and to create value. And so that's very much all about identification and management of uncertainty. And then compliance, the C of GRC, acting with integrity. So that's about adhering to regulations, but also anything internal, such as policies, any commitments or obligations, could be contractual. And so all of those things come together to help an organization act with integrity. GRC it covers everything in an organization, all the way from the whole top group parts, all the way through the entities, the processes, the assets, and it covers all the kind of objectives such as strategic, departmental, process level objectives as well. So it is much bigger than often people think when they hear GRC. Adil, from your point of view, how do you define access governance?
Yeah, so thanks, Paul, for defining that high-level governance, risk, and compliance. And when I think of access governance and what our customers are looking for, more specifically, I think of basically the process through which you monitor and control access to enterprise systems in your company, your organization. So who has what access? How did they get it? When? All of that information about access has become really important as our customers have moved to a digital platform, whether it be an ERP system, a CRM, HCM, all of these systems, on-premise, cloud, hybrid environment. Access governance has become a key top-of-mind opportunity and a challenge for our customers, because we're accessing information about how we work, how we process, how we execute our processes through these systems, digital platforms. So it's become really important to have the right level of access for the right individuals. And that's not just important for compliance, which is where a lot of these things started. For example, Sarbanes-Oxley here in the US. But it's also important for cybersecurity and cyber threats that we're facing at a very increasing and rapid level. So that's where access governance comes in. To me, it's a subdomain of the overall GRC And that's why I think the two topics fit together very nicely. It's not the same thing as access management. Access management is more about just basically your typical identity management, right? Or Active Directory, where you put someone in the network when they start at your organization, you give them some privileges and they've got access. There's been access management systems around for a long time. Where SafePaaS comes in is ready to take that system that you're using today for managing access and apply policies to that in such a way that you can control the risk in granting access and privileges at a very granular level to your identities and users that use those identities. So it's really about defining the security process and policies for your organization. And that's how we see access governance.
So what are some of the challenges that businesses are facing today?
Yeah, great question. So, these are some examples of the challenges we're seeing from our customers. The first and the most important one is integration, because I mentioned, you have different systems today, and as we move to this digital platform that is for the most part is hybrid for the enterprise customer, it's not just one size fits all. I mean, departments and teams are empowered to go buy the best tools and products, digital products on the platform that enables them to do their work more productively and more flexibly and more agile way, right? So integration becomes the challenge or a barrier, because now you have, for example, Okta or Azure, where you're doing identity management, and then you're doing change requests or requesting your privileges through an ITSM system like ServiceNow. And then you're getting access to, let's say, a Workday as your HCM system. When you first start, that's where you put in your timesheets, your expenses. You're using tools like, if you're in a customer service business using, let's say, Salesforce, so your account information is in Salesforce. And then your bills are being paid in Oracle or SAP, that's where you got your back office. So that challenge, what that means is that now you need some sort of a hub that can really define that identity and privileges that user has access to across all these environments. And the way they request access and how it gets fulfilled and provisioned and approved and all that becomes a challenge. And so customers are struggling with that. They're doing, spreadsheets, they're doing offline. So all the benefits, or many of the benefits of having a digital platform disappear if your users can get access to the right information on a least privileged basis, because on one end, you're cutting down productivity and creating bottlenecks. On the other end, if you open that up too much, you're inviting fraud and disclosure risks on your financial statements, ultimately, that impact your market value and your reputation, right? So that's kind of where we see the big challenge. As we talked, I just mentioned, dynamic workforce, right? So that's basically what the workforce is demanding from the companies and IT departments is, hey, we want the ability to work from anywhere. We want the flexibility to work on different devices. And we want to be able to have an agile team where people change roles more frequently than they did in the old industrial world, right? There's insider threats. I've talked about those threats. So that's a big reason why I mentioned previously compliance. These are the reasons, the drivers, if you will, and Paul will talk more about that in a minute. The other thing that's happening, that some of the points at the bottom you can read on the screen yourself, are important, is the complexity of your entitlements. So because you're dealing with multiple security models in a typical digital platform, the hierarchies are different, and it's confusing our security folks and our users, because they're talking at different levels and they're talking past each other. So when I say that the role is, let's say a payables manager is being assigned to someone, is that okay to assign that role or not? I mean, maybe it's okay, maybe it's not, because if that role contains information about creating suppliers and paying suppliers, it's probably not okay from an SOD perspective, right? You don't want the same person to be doing both of those activities. But maybe it's okay from a security perspective because they can't go and change the bank accounts. So you really have to drill into these challenges and really talk to your customers to find where the challenges are. And then the marketplace is demanding better security. So if you're doing business with your customers online, which many of us are, and our employees are online, staff is online, they're saying we need our data protected, we need our information protected, we want to maintain the rights over that data. Just a couple of days we heard the $1 billion plus fine that Facebook is facing out of GDPR. So customers are worried about where their data goes and how it's stored and where it's stored. A lot more interest in that. And so all of these problems are being addressed through the broader use cases around access governance, right? Change management is another area. We've talked about ITGC and SDLC controls. I'll close with that by saying that IT management is spending more time and money and pulling their hair out on ensuring those ITGC, IT general controls are effective. Because when you give someone access, they can go and change a configuration, let's say in your ERP system, and let's say they change the approval hierarchy or a bank account or payment terms, right? That could be just could be just a silly error because they're new to a system, they're not trained yet, or it could be more, for nefarious reasons or other problems within the process. So those are the kind of things that access governance helps you control. And we'll look at some examples later in the session.
Can I add anything, Paul?
So for me, I think Adil's really covered quite a lot of those things. Right at the top of the page, you talked about kind of the siloed organization almost, because business functions these days with easy to adopt cloud technologies, SaaS-based solutions, go out and buy them. And so that's a real challenge and a headache for those wanting to provide the governance over access to companies' data. So definitely that's one of the big challenges in this space. Plus also from my point of view, I often see some of the more operational dimensions, the access management aspects, in terms of the access governance aspects, move quicker than the overall governance and policy of the organization. And so you get a disconnect, a dislocation between what the overall governance says from an organizational point of view, who can do what where, becomes disconnected from reality because access governance evolves quicker. Because of having to respond to those drivers. So coming together, it's definitely a big challenge for organizations to then help manage that risk and demonstrate compliance with expectations of customers, regulators, auditors. All of those are driving those demands, and that's a big challenge for organizations with all those aspects going on.
So what are some of the drivers then, Paul?
So today, what I would see is the digital transformation. There are so many organizations transforming their business models, their operating models, to be able to respond to the changing demand in the marketplace for their organizations. Everything moves online. Cloud adoption, in terms of people moving everything from typically on-premise kind of capability through to the cloud. That aspect means it's an opportunity to re-engineer the fabric of the organization, the structure, the processes of how everything works. So that's a big driver for getting access governance integrated with understanding the ongoing risks and threats to an organization. Particularly as organizations, nearly every organization now will have cyber risk as one form or another in its top 10 risks. Almost every single one will. And the adoption of approaches such as zero trust means that you really do need a handle on access governance to be able to deliver on that management of that risk. So I think that is a driver alongside, because organizational executives have got far more focus on this than ever before. They're starting to understand the interconnected play of risks to business, If you manage those, you get successful outcomes as a business. If you don't, it can create reputational damage. It can create regulatory pain for you, customers, auditors, and the like. If you don't manage some of these risks, and because systems, technology, and the protection of that data has become so critical to organizations, access governance is critical. Adil mentioned it in as part of the challenge as well, but it's also a driver. This move to hybrid environments, where some people will be more in the office, at home, and it will be flex and fluid, and particularly as extended enterprises continue. So what I mean by that is where you rely on organizations outside of your own business to deliver part of your services, products, customers, customer service, and so forth. That hybrid environment of the extended enterprise, because you've got outside parties accessing your data, your systems, is again another big driver with what's going on out there. And then if we think about regulations, increasingly there are more regulations coming out around not only managing your own business, but that of your supply chain. Naturally, that started in much more of a ESG space, and more in the kind of worker welfare, modern slavery, increasingly in the environmental dimension around your supply chain. But if we think about ESG, a good portion of some of those elements are about personal privacy. And so those aspects of regulations and supply chain and everything else are going to start to increasingly bring in access governance and security related topics into those aspects. Those drivers are making organizations think about, in a much more joined up, collaborative way, how to respond to what's going in the market. The challenges we've highlighted in the past and still today is that silo-based approach of acquiring systems, managing things, and so forth. And so the more holistic framework type collaborative thinking is definitely a driver and also a key to success in terms of bringing access governance together into your wider GRC management. Adil, I don't know if you've got any additional thoughts on drivers out there that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more in the hearing more from the customers that are focused on the access issues. So I think inefficiency is another driver, I would say. I think you've covered that here through different points, but I just want to elaborate on that. There are a number of inefficiencies that or bottlenecks that our customers are reporting to us when they come to us, with these problems of compliance and governance and so forth. And as I mentioned briefly in the previous slide, is that it's really around having these, fragmentation of their access governance process, right? They're doing it because they're good companies, and that's why they talk to us, because they want to improve on something they're already doing. But it distracts them from their day jobs, right? To put it very simply. I mean, we're all on a mission to do something for the market, for our customers, grow, take care of our employees. But this piece really bogs you down, and there's an audit fatigue that we hear from our customers. Sometimes that also accelerates into a finding in an audit, let's say, which is a significant deficiency or even a material weakness. And that basically a death sentence for a company, because you have to spend unlimited amounts of time and resources to resolve those issues and make sure they don't reoccur. And trying to do that in spreadsheets and standard reports out of these systems is literally a fool's errand, right? So you have to find ways to get out. And so that's a very practical driver that I hear from the IT folks in organizations, audit folks, internal audit folks in the organizations, where they're doing the best they can, but unfortunately it's not good enough given the complexity of their enterprise. And there's time to, move back to their day jobs and cut the cost of this shadow work that goes on from teams to teams across the enterprise. That really bogs down people into the audit area. Many times they're not the audit experts, right? Most IT people haven't gone into, taken, deep audit and risk management classes or studied that or worked in that field. So you feel like you're just being, pinged for things you don't fully understand why you're doing, and so you lose focus. So I think giving them a system that orchestrates all that helps them go back to the jobs that they're initially hired for. So we're seeing that as a big driver as well.
Great insight there. And what about some of the use cases for unified GRC and IGA, access governance? Paul?
Sure, I'll kick that one off. So I've alluded to a couple of them already, but I'll just unpack those a little bit more. So for example, a reference cyber being often, one of the key risks organizations face. And there'll be a multitude of things organizations will do in response to that. There'll be about employee training. I imagine everybody on this webinar will have received training of some kind around the human in the middle is often the point of failure in the cyber dimension. Organizations will be performing vulnerability assessments and various things across their perimeter and on systems upon which they use. But this notion of zero trust as a key pillar to a successful cyber program, so lock everybody out and only give them what they need to perform their job role, is absolutely a key use case around how organizations are starting to respond to that risk. It's one of the key controls, one of the key mitigations to that risk in terms of bringing through those aspects from a managing cyber risk, managing access as a key dimension. So that integrated play as things start to come together between your mitigating response to those strategic risks will obviously be multifaceted, but access governance is a key growth area in terms of organizations using those controls and technologies like SafePaaS to be able to manage those aspects. The other one I've already referred to is that extended enterprise, the outsource capability, whatever you want to call it, in terms of organizations outside of your boundary, your walls, however you want to view it, having access to your systems to perform things on your behalf. That could be because you've outsourced the function, or it could be because your business model needs distributors, or you have franchisees, or whole different business models. And that data within your systems and that information is key to be able to, more increasingly organizations' success is built on the data they hold about their business, about their customers and so forth. And therefore, you need to be able to trust the third parties, but also manage what they have access to. So again, a policy-based access governance approach to managing that access from an external party point of view is that active approach alongside all the other techniques you would do to monitor ongoing risk around those third parties and that they're complying with the relevant laws and regulations on your behalf and so forth, as well as managing their access. And another one for me that I've personally experienced in some of the work I've done in my career is working with organizations where they've set up joint ventures. And those joint ventures can have a multitude of external parties involved in them. And often employees of those kind of shareholders, if you want to think of them as that, come together into the JV. Now, in certain circumstances, those organizations, so for example, if we think about oil and gas companies coming together into JVs to be able to then explore and extract oil, gas, they'll each be getting relevant volume shares, paying different royalties and different elements. There'll be commercially and competitively sensitive information flows happening all the time in those joint ventures. Those employees of those oil companies, gas companies are in running the JV. And so I've seen access governance be used in a really proactive way to firewall off secondees almost from each of the companies in the JV from seeing information related to another member of that JV. And it's a critical component of managing the risk and the regulatory requirements from an antitrust point of view around information flows, particularly for commercially and competitively sensitive information. So to me, access governance is becoming more of a critical tool in the management of risk and in the compliance with regulatory obligations. And sometimes they're not obvious because they're not directly related to IT or information security. It can be things like antitrust. And so the technology there from the likes of a SafePaaS is absolutely critical in helping achieve that risk management approach and that compliance with those regulations. Adil, what about yourself? Any kind of use cases or case studies you can think of from a kind of wrapping up some of those on the page here?
Yeah, no, that was great insight, Paul. And yeah, so I will take maybe a step more towards the segregation of duties, which is where I think GRC and IGA meets for many of our customers. So look, our customers have documented good risk and controls and a GRC product like the one you have, Paul. So they'll go in and they'll put in the risk control matrix, and they'll put in, things around reconciliation, things around. So if you think about it from a process risk controls perspective, so you have a record to report process, you have a procure to pay process, et cetera, et cetera. And so you will put in, highlight all your risk, you will put in the controls that mitigate that risk, and then you have some kind of a program to ensure that those risks are continuously mitigated through management certification, attestation, independent controls testing, and so forth. So that's been in place. It's a mature process, been in place. Certainly it's been automated. Next is, okay, so I've got all these controls that we believe our company follows, but how do I test them, right? And segregation of duties is one of those use cases where the two meet really nicely. So I'll just pick on that example. So you may have a control saying that we don't allow people that enter journals to post journals or create a supplier to pay suppliers. These may be high-level policies in your GRC module, and now you want to be able to unify that with your IGA policies, which means that to have true governance across the enterprise, as Paul was saying earlier, access governance is becoming more important. So now you want to basically enforce those controls to ensure that your controls are effective and they're operating effectively, just like they're designed, right? And so it's one thing to design a control, it's another to verify the operating effectiveness of it. And to do that, SafePaaS will, for example, take that information from the GRC platform and generate the SOD policies that I just talked about. So, can't pay the supplier if you can create a supplier, change credit limits on customers if you are sending them orders, because you can cause RevRec issues. So, and then there's sensitive access too, kind of goes in the same category in that use case on the top second box there. And that's basically, who can access employee data, who can access customer credit cards, those kinds of sensitive informations, supplier bank accounts. So that kind of goes hand in hand. So now you've got all these policies, but now you want to ensure that these policies are always effective, because digital platforms are super fast and things can happen in minutes, seconds, and therefore fraud can happen really fast. Errors can happen quicker. So what we do with the policies with IGA that SafePaaS has is we basically prevent that from happening, right? So whether it's somebody requesting access to conflicting entitlements or sensitive access to something they shouldn't have access to see the data, or they're just performing their process, they're executing a process and they can do conflicting transactions like creating suppliers and paying suppliers. So we catch that, we prevent that from happening, we detect that, obviously, just make sure, in the first place, you don't have roles assigned to users that can perform that. And then where, we come together and become unified is where sometimes you'll have a situation like I'm thinking of one of our clients that has small distribution centers all over the world. They're in chemicals industry. And they have small offices, but they have the same people doing shipping and receiving, which generally is a problem and is against their policies. But they're not going to go hire double their workforce just to control that. So those are examples where you have circumstances or business constraints where you need to rely on compensating controls. So in this example for this customer, the way that they compensate for that risk of the same person shipping and receiving the merchandise, these chemicals, which are very pricey, is that they do an inventory on a perpetual basis. They also have other inventory controls that are confidential. I won't get into the details, but all these inventory controls are in place, but these inventory controls are actually in their GRC platform, right? So now for us to say that we are going to grant access to someone in Netherlands so they can ship and receive out of the warehouse, we want to tie that back to the compensating control that's sitting in that unified platform on the GRC platform, because that control needs to be tested and verified on a periodic basis to give the confidence and trust to management that the compensating control is effective. So now you have a challenge if you don't have a unified platform, because now you've got to go back to the offline world, which is full of errors and mistakes and time consuming and all the usual problems. So by unifying these platforms, what you can now do is take the risk and control information from the GRC platform and plug that into the compensating control in your access governance platform. And so the two systems are truly unified, and you reduce that, you can break down the silos of someone in security doing this piece and IT doing that piece, finance doing the other piece, compliance doing the, so you break down those silos, and that's where you get efficiencies. That's where you get, you remove the bottlenecks, right? You get to optimize your business, and you become more of a proactive GRC organization. Move that up to the maturity level, right? Where most companies are still, if it's not unified, they're still at the early stages, maybe informal stages or reactive stage, where you find a problem and then you go fix it, right? That's costly, because then you got reputation risk depending on the size of the problem. You've got management challenges, you've got auditor findings, many other problems, right? Not to mention distraction from your day jobs. So by unifying the two platforms I mentioned, you can really integrate the controls framework that you have built in your GRC software with the access controls policies that are actively monitoring your user activities in this digital platform on which your business runs today, right? So that's kind of the big one that I'm close to.
Excellent. And how about the benefits? What are the top benefits for a unified approach to GRC and access governance?
I mean, from my perspective, first of all, it's about driving standardization and driving automation and efficiency. So in days gone by, and still in many organizations, some of this stuff will be done manually in terms of a process to manage and continuously review. It may also be done if you are an organization with multiple locations. It may not be standardized. And so driving efficiency is to me the number one aspect around not only then the access governance with the whole process in terms of making sure things are efficient, but actually how that then feeds through into the wider risk landscape and conformance reporting that will flow up an organization. Because access governance is one part of the control to managing the overall flow of information around what are the risks we have as an organization and how well are we managing them. Within that governance aspect, so achieving objectives as an organization. And objectives not just strategic, it could be ensuring we get things made and delivered to our customers on time. All of these things are interconnected. And so that aspect around bringing it all together in an efficient way, so the access governance feeding into the GRC framework and tooling, and then up through the layers of an organization, is absolutely key to reducing time in reporting, reducing the amount of effort and time it takes to manage risk and resilience and compliance. I think as well, driving effectiveness. So in some of the things that Bill's spoken about already, we're talking about fewer things slipping through the gaps. So improving effectiveness, but also that audit trail of who did what and when, that defensible system record. So that supports your ability to demonstrate compliance, act with integrity, as well as then managing the risk, but having that auditable capability. So when your auditors, the regulators come in, you can demonstrate the holistic management of risk, of which access governance is one of the key components. But also, if we think about kind of agility in the third pillar here, from my perspective, and we talked about this earlier on in the challenges, organizations are becoming very fluid in terms of people continually changing roles to meet the needs of the business as people rotate through, but also the demands of younger generation workers wanting to have that constant challenge and move around an organization, as well as organizations having much more flexible models than maybe more traditional ways of working. And the ability to have agility through policy and structure rather than the minutiae of rules in access governance is key to managing that risk. So particularly as businesses reorganize to pivot to ever-changing demands, that need to have agility through the technological capability of the integration between GRC and access governance is critical to me. Dylan, from your point of view, what other benefits have you been seeing out there as these worlds kind of merge?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for covering the high-level benefits. I can maybe just add a few examples that might be relevant to customers I've been in the trenches with for many, many years, and talk to them about what they get out of it, right? So just kind of, I'll just talk through it like almost like a case study of some examples that I see. So the benefits are wide-ranging. I think these are great 4 categories to think of it this way. We've been talking a lot about efficiency. I think that's been the theme today on this webinar, and that's probably the number one, as we obviously called it out here. And so, if you're going to get rid of bottlenecks, I mean, governance still is very much a fragmented process in most even mature organizations, because it's siloed, right? So I think by unifying these key areas of your governance, which is how do you mitigate risk, how do you stay compliant with regulations and so forth, and then how do you control it, how do your internal controls work really to provide that efficiency in governance, right? So because it's scattered throughout the organization, it tends to be reactive and also siloed, which means that some controls are over-tested, some are missed completely, right? That's how you end up with audit fatigue and findings. So what I see from our customers is that they're making the decision to integrate all of their GRC activities, including access governance, into a single platform to drop those barriers and become more proactive. And I can think of an example in the West Coast. I worked with a client recently that basically was deploying a new ERP system in the cloud, and they were doing these things in many different systems, right? So they had IDM systems, they had some homegrown, survey-like tools where they could, ask their management to review the controls. They had some point solutions for doing audit, and so the internal audit had its own set of tools to be able to test the controls using whatever methodology you have. And so they brought us in to look at access governance, and when we started looking at their segregation of duty controls, their sensitive access controls, it became really clear to us that for us to really solve their problems, we had to unify the rest of these areas: the audit, the compliance, the finance, IT. And so we opened up a dialogue with all of these key stakeholders, and essentially what that led to is this vision of the need to combine all of these activities on the same platform. Now, it's not easy unless you've done it before, because you can end up with a lot of time wasted from senior executives. So for example, the questions we were getting, well, but the way we test a control from internal audit has to match with the way our external audit and us have aligned. Basically, let's say your randomizing methodology, your work paper, your sampling approach, all of that has to be aligned. So we really can't use the same system that compliance uses for doing SOX 302 certification. And ITGC folks that were doing access governance said, well, we can't use any of those systems because, so you have to kind of start at a template level, at a library of controls level, and then kind of drill down into, okay, what are the common testing procedures we have, so that we have a common framework on how, when we say a control is operating effectively, it should be the same definition. So we had to do quite a bit of work to really get the same lingo or same nomenclature going in the organization. And once we did that, then the efficiency just became so obvious to everybody, right? Because we took the nomenclature of 5 different groups within your enterprise and baselined them to a common reference point. And once that happened, then we could, when we talk about access controls and access governance, it's very clear where that maps back to for the internal audit, for compliance, for finance, for IT security, and etc. Right? And so the rest of the job becomes a lot easier. So that's just an example that I thought I share an efficiency that might be helpful. I'll pick maybe one more example since we have a little bit of time, and then we'll open it up for questions. So one of the last points, I'll pick number 4, active governance and integrity, right? So I also had an opportunity to work with a top university that is on the West Coast that has, one of the highest profiles and of alumni that run companies like Google and Facebook and so forth. So what I found working with this university, which is again a complete different context than a public company in the US, is that they don't have a mandate. They don't have a mandate like SOX or some other regulatory mandate. But there's been, universities, if you have worked with them, you know that they're pretty, kind of open-minded sort of places where controls are almost seen as, against the grain, and they're very smart people in this place. So it was more of a cultural challenge for us till we really this light bulb went on one day. We were getting a lot of pushback that, hey, we trust our people. I don't know why these auditors keep telling us we need to do things differently, and they tell us we have to have controls. Obviously, we have controls. So sometimes you also get that, right? Very informal approach, even though it's a very sophisticated, top of the world university, they just don't pay a lot of attention to the controls the way an insurance company would, right? Or a bank would. So what we did for them is really talking about, okay, we know you don't want to constantly look over the shoulders of your professors and department heads and your student population, but we also agreed that you want to be out of the papers because they were in the papers because somebody used a grant to buy a boat, and they ended up getting their brand tarnished, if you will. And the people that grant money to universities are these endowments that are very, very strict about, where their money goes. So they certainly didn't want to be in the paper about that. So what we came across was this idea of active governance. What that means is that we want you to go and do your day job and invent the next Google or whatever you guys want to do, but you want to have a system that actively monitors those policies and processes so you are not burdened with it. And that seemed to have resonated really well with the senior executives and the board. And so what active governance basically means to this client, this university client, and now we do that for many other clients, is that we're going to embed the controls within the business processes themselves. We're not going to constantly look over people's shoulders. So it's slightly different than monitoring controls. Monitoring controls are like, okay, I'm going to monitor your thresholds. If you're within the threshold, you're okay. If you go above the threshold, we're going to send an email to you and your boss and everybody else and embarrass you. And that's not a culture for every company, right? So embedded controls are where within the process, let's say I just happen to have privileged access, where I can go and see a supplier data and also pay suppliers, but I can't update a supplier. However, we change some technology and suddenly that control is gone. In other words, the control is not working inside the ERP. That's where active control comes in, because now the active control, like the way we do it in SafePaaS, enables you to block that user from doing that activity that can cause a compliance issue, a audit finding, financial problem and disclosure, whatever that risk is, security risk. So active governance is the way this organization, this educational institution, the way they use that is to be able to do their business as usual, but they've got these guardrails, right? These active governance guardrails, which are active controls essentially, that in the background are monitoring, but they're not just sending out, messages out to annoy people. They actually can prevent the risk from occurring because these controls are preventive in nature. They're embedded in the system. As a byproduct of this, so this was the big win, right? Because they didn't want to create a huge audit department in each of their campuses. So they were able to use a tight audit team, centralized team in the controller's office. And then they were able to then use this active governance to really enable in their key systems, what they considered their financial systems, cash management systems, and other business systems, right? These kind of controls where they could then tweak them and adjust them, and then when it came down for time for audit, instead of auditing every transaction or doing sampling methodology like the three-way match, they're able to simply point to the active governance controls and say, look, we haven't had an incident, and these 3 incidents came up and we were able to prevent that from happening. So the benefit that they have seen from this solution by unifying GRC and active governance or access governance, which is active in their environment, is that they have significantly reduced, more than 50% the time they were spending on remediation and issues, and they're still able to do their jobs and work on their real mission of building a great educational institution. So active governance is another huge benefit that I can share with you. Certainly a lot of stories around agility and so forth as well. But I think we have 5 minutes left, so I'll stop here.
Yeah, great story there, Adil. I think I'll jump into the questions because we only have 5 minutes left. And if anybody wants a copy of the deck, then please reach out. So in the interest of time, Paul, I think this question will be for you. Obviously, there have been some new updates this week around UK SOX. So where does all of this, what you've been talking about, discussing here, where does all of this fit into UK SOX?
Yeah, so the Financial Reporting Council, the FRC, have released a consultation paper it's been anticipated coming out around the UK Corporate Governance Code. There's a few different aspects to it. You've got the audit and assurance policy aspect. This is about how organizations are going to perform their audit, both internal and external, and various dimensions, but demonstrating how they're taking their stakeholder considerations on. And so that fits into the world of GRC and access governance. I think more specifically, though, is it has really sharpened the aspect around the risk and internal control system in an organization in terms of the requirements. So it's about that the one is effectively designed and that management have got comfort, and management have now got to attest to the how they're going to get comfort on that and articulate how they've got comfort and what the outcome is. So it's making them report a lot more around those aspects. It's not going to be as prescriptive as say the UK SOX approach, but it's about driving aspects through. And one interesting change, if you go and look at it, there's a really good kind of track change version on the FRC's website. It's struck out the words internal financial controls and made it about all risk management controls. So it's not just about anything related to finance now. And so this is about making sure that the board and the non-executive directors and internal audit are all focusing on the design of an effective one and assuring themselves that works. So there's a whole range of other changes within it, but those are the key ones related to control. So if we think about the impact there, it's going to be focused not just on finance anymore. It's making it being about able to articulate the effectiveness and how you assure yourself. And it is the internal control system in totality. So to me, that's going to have kind of real drive to make people really look at their approach to managing the risks and having the controls in place, of which obviously access governance is a key part of that risk and control framework.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Paul. Well, we are very nearly at the top of the hour. So we are offering a complimentary discussion for all attendees today, a maturity roadmap session and planning session for GRC identity strategies, and next steps for you to be more effective in your organization. So if you are interested in having a session with our speakers, Paul and Adil, today, then please feel free to reach out to us and we'll gladly schedule some time on the calendar with you. So a big thank you. Oh, I don't have my camera on. So a big thank you to our speakers today and a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you're able to take away some of the key points discussed today to implement in your own organizations, and we look forward to talking to you very soon. So thank you, Adil, thank you, Paul, and we look forward to talking very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.